My name is Monica, and I'm 29 years old. For most of my life, I tried to earn my mother's love through achievement, perfection, and endless compromise. But everything changed the night she looked me straight in the eyes and said those words that still echo in my mind: "I'd rather treat you as a stranger than call you my child." I stood there frozen, but in that moment, something inside me finally broke free. Before I share how I responded and the aftermath that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had to create boundaries with toxic family members. I grew up in a tidy middle-class suburb of Chicago in a house that looked perfect from the outside. My mother Barbara was a corporate executive who commanded respect everywhere she went. Her sleek business suits and perfectly styled hair became the image I associated with success even as a young child. But that success came with impossible expectations that spilled over onto me. My earliest memories involve my mother's critical gaze. When I was 4, I proudly showed her a drawing I had made of our family. Instead of the praise I hoped for, she pointed out that the sun I had drawn in the corner was the wrong color. Suns are yellow, Monica, not orange. You need to pay attention to details. Even then, I remember feeling that strange, hollow sensation in my chest that would become all too familiar over the years. My father Thomas was different. When he was home, he would ruffle my hair and call me his little artist. He worked long hours as a financial advisor, leaving me alone with my mother most evenings and weekends. Those rare moments when he noticed my artwork or praised my creativity became treasures I collected and revisited in my mind during harder times. In kindergarten, my teacher Ms. Wilson recognized my artistic ability and encouraged it. She displayed my paintings prominently and even entered one in a local children's art exhibition. When I told my mother, her response was tepid. "That's nice, but don't get distracted from your real studies. Art is a hobby, not a career." I was 5 years old. As elementary school progressed, the pressure intensified. A 95 on a spelling test wasn't celebration worthy, it was a reminder that I had missed 5 points. Piano recitals weren't opportunities to perform, but chances to embarrass her if I missed a note. My room needed to be spotless, my clothes unwrinkled, my behavior impeccable, especially when her colleagues or friends were around. By 3rd grade, I was having stomach aches before school. By 4th grade, I was lying awake at night worrying about tests and presentations. Not because I cared about the grades, but because I dreaded her reaction to anything less than perfection. When I was 10, my art teacher entered my painting in a statewide competition. It won first place in my age group. The local newspaper even ran a small story with my picture. For once, I thought my mother would be proud. We stood in front of my displayed artwork at the award ceremony, and all she said was, "The perspective on the house is slightly off. You should have fixed that before submitting it." Something shifted in me that day. Standing there in the gallery, surrounded by proud parents taking photos and hugging their children, I realized that whatever I did would never be good enough for her. There was always going to be a flaw, an imperfection, a reason to withhold the approval I so desperately sought. I tried everything to connect with her. When she mentioned enjoying tennis as a teenager, I begged for lessons. But my form was wrong, my serve too weak. When she mentioned loving classical music, I practiced piano for hours, only to be told my Bach interpretation lacked emotion. When she talked about her college debate team success, I joined the middle school debate club only to be critiqued on my delivery and research methods. At 12, I started keeping a journal, hiding it between my mattress and box spring. It became my safe space where I could express my feelings without judgment. Art became more than a hobby, it became my refuge. I would lose myself for hours in colours and shapes, creating a world where there were no wrong answers, no disappointed stares. Books became my friends and counsellors. I devoured stories about brave children overcoming obstacles, finding families who loved them for who they were. Somewhere deep inside, I began to understand that what was happening in my house wasn't normal, wasn't healthy, but understanding and escaping are two very different things. High school should have been an exciting new chapter, but for me, it was just another stage where I could never measure up. At 14, I walked the halls of Lakeside High with my shoulders slightly hunched, as if perpetually bracing for criticism. My mother's standards only grew more impossible. My appearance became another battlefield. My hair was never quite right, my skin needed better care, my clothes were either too childish or too mature. When acne appeared on my forehead sophomore year, she marched me to a dermatologist and stood over me while he examined my face, making me feel like some defective product. "I don't understand it," she said to him as if I wasn't there. I never had skin problems as a teenager. I've told her repeatedly to stop touching her face. The daily barrage of criticism was wearing me down, but thankfully I wasn't completely alone anymore. I met Jasmine in art class and Taylor in English, and they quickly became my lifelines. They were the first people who noticed something wasn't right. "Your mom seems really intense," Jasmine said carefully after Barbara had dropped me off for a study session, listing out everything I needed to accomplish before she picked me up 3 hours later. "The way she talks to you," Taylor added one day after overhearing my mum on the phone with me. "It's not okay, Monica." Having friends who saw what was happening made me feel less crazy, less defective. But it also highlighted just how abnormal my home life was. The comparisons were relentless. Jessica's daughter got straight A's and plays varsity volleyball. Your cousin Michael got accepted to that summer program at Yale. Amanda's mother told me she never has to remind Amanda to study. I existed in a constant state of inadequacy. The worst was a Thanksgiving dinner when I was 15. Relatives from both sides of the family gathered at our house, and my mother was in rare form orchestrating the perfect holiday. I had been enlisted to help serve and had been cooking alongside her since dawn. When I brought out the cranberry sauce and accidentally dripped some on the white tablecloth, the room went silent. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," my mother said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "No attention to detail, no care for nice things. Do you have any idea how much this tablecloth cost?" My aunt tried to intervene. "Barbara, it's just a small spot. It'll come out." But my mother wasn't finished. "This is typical Monica behavior. Half efforts, careless mistakes. Sometimes I wonder if she does these things deliberately to embarrass me." I stood there, cranberry dish still in hand, as relatives awkwardly looked at their plates. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. I excused myself to the kitchen and cried silently as I scrubbed at the stain, knowing the real stain, the feeling of humiliation, would never wash away. Depression crept in during those years, a heavy shadow that followed me everywhere. I withdrew from clubs and activities I had once enjoyed. My grades began to slip, not dramatically, but enough to trigger more lectures about commitment and discipline. Sleep became elusive and food lost its appeal. I either couldn't eat or couldn't stop eating, my weight fluctuating, as I developed an unhealthy relationship with food. The one constant bright spot was Ms. Reynolds, my art teacher. She noticed the dark themes emerging in my work and asked me to stay after class one day. "There's a lot of pain in your pieces lately," she said gently. "Art is a wonderful outlet, but I want to make sure you're okay." That simple expression of concern broke something open in me, and I found myself telling her about the constant criticism, the impossible standards, the walking on eggshells. She listened without judgment, then recommended I speak with the school counsellor. Mrs. Garcia, the counsellor, suggested family therapy after several sessions with me. When I broached the subject with my parents, my father looked uncomfortable and my mother was indignant. "Therapy? What have you been saying about our family? We don't need strangers telling us how to parent. We've given you every advantage, and this is how you repay us." That was the end of that discussion. My small acts of rebellion started that year. I dyed a streak of blue in my dark hair using Kool-Aid, knowing it would wash out before I went home. I borrowed clothes from Jasmine that I changed into at school outfits, with more personality than the bland, appropriate attire my mother selected. These tiny freedoms kept me going, small reminders that someday I would have control over my own life. Senior year arrived with the pressure of college applications. While my classmates were excited about this new chapter, I saw it as my only escape route, my chance to finally breathe. But even this process became another battlefield with my mother. "Business schools are the only sensible option," she declared over dinner one night. "Your father and I have discussed it, and we think Northwestern has an excellent program. Close enough to home, but with the prestige that will set you up for success." I pushed my food around my plate, gathering courage. "Actually, I've been researching art schools." The silence that followed was deafening. My father suddenly became very interested in his potatoes. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "Art schools." She said it like I had suggested joining the circus. "That is not happening, Monica. We're not spending thousands of dollars for you to get a useless degree and end up waiting tables." But for once, I didn't back down. Throughout that fall, I secretly applied to 5 art schools across the country, focusing on programs with strong graphic design departments. Ms. Reynolds helped me assemble my portfolio after hours, wrote me a glowing recommendation, and even helped me navigate financial aid applications. "You have real talent," she told me, "and more importantly, you have the drive and work ethic. You could have a wonderful career doing what you love. Those words sustained me through the tense months of waiting for responses. When the letters started arriving in March, I managed to intercept most of them from the mailbox. 4 acceptances and 1 waitlist. I was elated but terrified of the confrontation to come. The Pratt Institute in New York offered me a partial scholarship. It was my dream school far enough from Chicago to truly be independent. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my parents, the argument that followed was explosive. "This is ridiculous." My mother's voice echoed through our kitchen. "You deliberately went behind our backs after we made our expectations clear. They're your expectations, not mine." "Kason," I shot back, surprising myself with my defiance. "I don't want to study business. I never have." "Then you can pay for this foolishness yourself." Her voice was cold, final. "Not a penny of our money will go toward an art degree." My father finally spoke up, but not in my defense. "Monica, be reasonable. We only want what's best for you. Security, a good income. Artists struggle their whole lives." "I'd rather struggle doing something I love than be successful and miserable." I said the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The look of disgust on my mother's face told me everything I needed to know about her opinion of my priorities. That night, I sat up researching student loans, work-study programs, and part-time jobs in New York. It would be hard, but not impossible. The partial scholarship would help, and I could find roommates to share expenses. For the first time in my life, the prospect of financial hardship felt less frightening than the emotional cost of staying under my mother's control. August couldn't come fast enough. The summer was a cold war in our house, with my mother alternating between icy silence and renewed attempts to change my mind. But my acceptance package from Pratt sat on my desk like a passport to freedom, and I clung to it through those difficult months. Moving day finally arrived. My father helped load my minimal belongings into the car while my mother watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Her parting words were, "When this falls apart, don't expect us to bail you out." The train ride to New York was both terrifying and exhilarating. Each mile put distance between me and the crushing weight of disapproval I had lived under. By the time the Manhattan skyline came into view, I felt like I could finally take a full breath. My roommate Amanda was everything I wasn't confident outgoing, and from a boisterous Italian family who helped us set up our tiny dorm room with homemade curtains and care packages full of snacks. Her mother hugged me tightly before they left. "You call us if you need anything, honey. Anything at all." The simple kindness nearly undid me. College was challenging in the best way. For the first time, my creativity was valued rather than dismissed. Professors pushed me to explore, experiment, and even fail sometimes with no judgment attached to the process. I threw myself into my studies, soaking up knowledge about color theory, typography, digital design, and marketing. New friends entered my life, people who knew nothing about my past and accepted me as I was. Weekend trips to museums, late-night study sessions, fueled by cheap pizza, impromptu dance parties, and cramped apartments. These became the new memories that began to outnumber the painful ones from home. The weekly phone calls with my mother were the only dark spots. Every Sunday evening, I would sit on my bed back against the wall and brace myself for the interrogation. My grades, my social life, my eating habits, my spending all came under scrutiny. No matter what successes I shared, she found the potential problems, the hidden pitfalls, the ways I might still fail. I always hung up fighting tears, feeling like that little girl again, never quite good enough. Holidays were the worst. Returning home felt like slipping back into an old, uncomfortable skin that no longer fit. My mother's critical eye noted every change from my more artistic clothing choices to my new independence. She seemed personally offended that I had built a life without her approval. But something had fundamentally shifted. Being around Amanda's family and other friends' parents, I saw what healthy relationships looked like. I noticed how they celebrated their children's uniqueness rather than trying to mold them into predetermined shapes. I realized that the constant criticism I had grown up with wasn't normal or necessary. It wasn't even helpful. The problem wasn't me. It never had been. Graduation day arrived with a bittersweet quality. My parents attended, sitting stiffly in the audience as I crossed the stage to receive my diploma with highest honors. My mother's comment afterward was predictable. "At least you took your studies seriously. Now the real challenge begins finding actual employment with this degree." But I had already secured a position at Horizon Design, a respected firm in Boston. The starting salary wasn't impressive, but the creative director had been enthusiastic about my portfolio and promised growth opportunities. Most importantly, it was a chance to prove that my choice had been the right one, at least for me. Boston became my new home, a city of history and innovation that suited my developing aesthetic. My tiny apartment in Cambridge was all mine, decorated with thrift store finds and my own artwork. I fell in love with the cobblestone streets, the changing seasons, and the sense of building something uniquely mine. My career trajectory surpassed even my own expectations. Within 18 months, I was leading my own projects. By the 2-year mark, I had clients specifically requesting my work. The creative director mentioned partnership potential down the road, something unheard of for someone my age. When I shared these developments with my mother during our now monthly calls, her response was always the same, cautious acknowledgement followed by warnings. That's nice, but the design industry is notoriously unstable. Are you contributing to your 401k? You should be saving at least 30% of your income. Or leading projects already, be careful not to step on toes. People resent young upstarts who rise too quickly. Even my successes were framed as potential disasters waiting to happen. The anxiety that preceded our conversations never lessened, and I often found myself physically ill before picking up the phone. At the suggestion of a friend, I finally sought therapy. Dr. Winters, a compassionate woman in her 50s, helped me understand what I had been experiencing my entire life. What you're describing sounds like emotional abuse, she said gently during our 3rd session, and some of your mother's behaviors align with narcissistic parenting patterns. The words hit me like a physical blow. Abuse. I had never applied that term to my upbringing. There had been no hitting, no obvious neglect. We always had food, nice clothes, family vacations. But Dr. Winters helped me see that emotional wounds can be just as damaging as physical ones, sometimes more so, because they're invisible. Children of narcissistic parents often struggle with low self-esteem, anxiety, and difficulty setting boundaries, she explained. They're taught that their value comes from achievement or reflecting well on the parent, not from their inherent worth as a person. Over months of weekly sessions, I began to understand the patterns that had shaped my life. The hypervigilance always watching for signs of disapproval. The perfectionism that was never about excellence, but about avoiding criticism. The deep-seated belief that I was somehow fundamentally flawed. Armed with this new understanding, I attempted to establish boundaries with my mother. I limited calls to twice a month. I changed the subject when she began criticizing my choices. I even tried direct communication. Mum, when you focus only on the negative aspects of my news, it makes me not want to share things with you. Her response was predictable denial, then counterattack. I'm only trying to help you avoid mistakes. If you're too sensitive for constructive criticism, that's not my problem. Every attempt at healthy communication was met with manipulation, guilt, or dismissal. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. During this period, I met Jordan, a software engineer with kind eyes and a quiet confidence I found immediately attractive. Our relationship developed naturally without the drama or intensity I had come to expect from important connections. He listened when I spoke, valued my opinions, and supported my career without feeling threatened by it. The first time he came with me to Chicago for a holiday visit, he witnessed my mother's behavior firsthand. In the car afterward, he was uncharacteristically quiet. Is it always like that? He finally asked. Like what? The constant corrections, the subtle put-downs. The way she managed to criticize your promotion while appearing to congratulate you. It was like watching someone deflate a balloon in slow motion. Having an outside perspective, especially from someone who cared about me, was validating in a way therapy had been. I wasn't oversensitive. I wasn't imagining things. The dynamic was real and it was toxic. The contrast between Jordan's family and mine couldn't have been more stark. His parents, Robert and Susan, welcomed me with genuine warmth. They asked questions about my work because they were interested not to find flaws. They kept a framed copy of a magazine that had featured one of my designs proudly displayed in their living room, something my own parents had never done. As my emotional health improved, my career continued to flourish. But the approach of family visits still triggered panic attacks. The week before a planned trip home, I would experience insomnia, loss of appetite, even hives. My body remembered the stress even as my mind tried to prepare for it. Financially and professionally, I was more independent than ever. But emotionally, I was still tethered to patterns established in childhood. Dr. Winters helped me see that healing would require more than understanding. It would require action, difficult choices about what role my parents, especially my mother, would play in my adult life. I just didn't realize how soon those choices would need to be made. Jordan proposed on a crisp fall evening in the Boston Public Garden, the autumn leaves creating a perfect backdrop for the moment. It was intimate, thoughtful, and entirely us. I said yes without hesitation, knowing with certainty that this was the partner I wanted by my side. Sharing the news with his family was joyful. They opened champagne, asked about our ideas for the wedding, and expressed genuine happiness for our future together. Telling my parents was a different experience entirely. Engaged. Don't you think you're rushing into this? How long have you really known him? My mother's voice over the phone carried that familiar note of disapproval. 2 years, Mum. We've been together for 2 years. That's not very long for such a serious commitment. And what about his career prospects? Software is so volatile these days. My father offered mild congratulations in the background, but as usual, deferred to my mother's stronger opinions. I ended the call, feeling deflated, the joy of our engagement dimmed by her reaction. Jordan squeezed my hand. We don't need her approval to be happy. I knew he was right, but some part of me still yearned for the maternal support I had never experienced. Wedding planning quickly became another battlefield. Though we were paying for everything ourselves, my mother acted as though she had veto power over every decision. The venue was too unconventional. The spring date competed with my cousin's graduation. My choice of a simple dress lacked sophistication. When I selected my friend Jasmine as my maid of honor rather than a cousin, my mother preferred the criticism intensified. Family should come first, Monica. It's like you're deliberately trying to exclude your roots from this wedding. Each phone call left me exhausted and questioning my choices. Jordan suggested we limit discussions about wedding details with her, but that only led to accusations that we were shutting her out. 3 months into planning, my parents came to Boston for what was supposed to be a nice dinner to discuss wedding arrangements. We met at an upscale restaurant, neutral territory, where I hoped the public setting might temper my mother's behavior. I was wrong. The criticism started before we even ordered appetizers. That neckline isn't particularly flattering on you, she commented about my dress. Then to Jordan. I hope you're prepared for the New England winters. Monica has always been susceptible to seasonal depression. Jordan squeezed my knee under the table, a silent show of support. Throughout the meal, she questioned every wedding decision we had made, from our choice of photographer to our honeymoon destination. When I mentioned that Jordan's mother had been helping me find a good seamstress for dress alterations, her expression soured. I see. So Susan gets to be involved, but my opinions are dismissed. Mom, I've shared everything with you. I've listened to your input, but ultimately these are our choices to make. Your choices seem to consistently exclude my preferences. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin. I'm beginning to think you don't want me involved at all. I want you involved as a supportive mother, not as a wedding planner, I said, trying to keep my voice level. A supportive mother, she repeated, her tone mocking. You mean someone who simply smiles and nods at whatever impractical ideas you come up with? No, someone who respects that I'm an adult making my own decisions. The tension escalated as we moved from topic to topic. When I mentioned our desire for a smaller wedding of around 80 guests, she scoffed. That's absurd. There are at least 50 family members who need to be invited, plus all our friends and colleagues. We want an intimate celebration, not a networking event, I countered. My father tried to intervene. Barbara, perhaps we should trust Monica and Jordan to plan the kind of day they want. She turned on him. Of course you would say that. You've always indulged her whims and look where it's gotten her. Where exactly has it gotten me, Mom? I asked, my patience finally snapping. A successful career, a loving relationship, a life I'm proud of. Her eyes narrowed. A life where you constantly reject good advice and family tradition, where you think you know better than everyone who came before you. Not everyone, just you. The words hung in the air between us. My father looked down at his plate. Jordan sat perfectly still beside me. I have only ever wanted what's best for you. My mother said, her voice cold. No, you've wanted what you think is best for me. There's a difference. After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is the thanks I get, disrespect and ingratitude. I took a deep breath. I'm grateful for the opportunities you provided, but I'm not grateful for the constant criticism, the impossible standards, the way you've made me feel like I'm never good enough. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. If you're so miserable with how you were raised, perhaps we should just step back from this relationship entirely. Maybe we should. Is that what you want? She challenged. To cut your own mother out of your wedding, out of your life. I struggled to find words that wouldn't pour gasoline on the fire. I want a healthy relationship with you, but that requires respect going both ways. She sat back in her chair, her posture rigid with anger. I see. Well, if that's how you feel, I'll make this very simple. She looked me directly in the eyes and said words I will never forget. I'd rather treat you as a stranger than call you my child. The restaurant continued buzzing around us, but at our table time seemed to stop. I felt physically frozen, as though ice had replaced the blood in my veins. My father's sharp intake of breath was the only sound from our group. Jordan's hand found mine under the table, warm and steady. That small point of contact anchored me as the implications of her words sank in. My own mother had just disowned me, over wedding centerpieces and guest lists, over my simple desire to be treated with respect. My father finally spoke. "Barbara, you don't mean that. You're upset." "I know exactly what I mean, Thomas." Her voice was eerily calm now. "If Monica prefers to reject everything I stand for, everything I've tried to teach her, then perhaps it's best if we acknowledge the reality of our situation." I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, who had shaped so much of my life through her approval and disapproval, and felt something shift inside me. The desperate need for her validation that had driven me for 29 years suddenly seemed less important than my own self-respect. Without a word, I placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant. Jordan quickly followed, leaving my parents sitting in stunned silence. In the car, neither of us spoke for several minutes. The city lights blurred through my tears as Jordan drove us home. Finally, he asked, "Are you okay?" "No," I answered honestly, "but I think I will be." Kaigan. That night, as we lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that something fundamental had changed. The words that were meant to hurt me had instead set me free. If she would rather treat me as a stranger than accept me as I am, then perhaps that was the healthiest option for us both. The next morning, I called Dr. Winters and scheduled an emergency session. Sitting in her comfortable office, I recounted the previous night's events, my voice surprisingly steady. She finally said out loud what I've felt my entire life, that I'm only worthy of being her daughter if I conform to her expectations. I twisted the engagement ring on my finger, and the strangest part is once the initial shock wore off, I felt relieved. Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes having someone clearly state their position removes the ambiguity that keeps us hoping for change. Your mother has given you a clear choice: conform or be treated as a stranger. What do I do now? That depends on what you want, Monica. We've talked about family estrangement before. It's a protective measure some people take when relationships become too damaging. It's not a punishment, it's a boundary. For the next hour, we discussed the implications of limited or no contact with my mother. The grief that would come with accepting that I would never have the maternal relationship I had longed for. The potential impact on my relationship with my father, who had never stood up to my mother in any meaningful way. The possible backlash from extended family who wouldn't understand. Take some time to process before making any decisions, Dr. Winters advised. This isn't something you need to resolve immediately. But over the next week, as my mother's words continued to echo in my mind, a response began to form. Not one of anger or retribution, but of calm acceptance and firm boundaries. I sat at my desk one evening, Jordan working quietly across the room, and began to write a letter. I wanted my response to be thoughtful, not reactive. I wanted to be clear about my position without resorting to the same tactics she had used against me. "Dear Mum," I wrote, "I've been reflecting on your statement that you would rather treat me as a stranger than call me your child. After much consideration, I've decided to accept your choice." I continued explaining that I had spent my entire life trying to earn her approval and love, compromising my own needs and identity in the process. That I had come to understand this was not a healthy dynamic for either of us. If you prefer to treat me as a stranger, I will respect that decision, but I think it's important to understand what that means. Strangers don't have access to my personal life. They don't get input on my wedding plans. They don't receive invitations to intimate family gatherings. They certainly won't have relationships with any children Jordan and I might have in the future. I made it clear that this wasn't a punishment or an attempt to hurt her. It was simply the natural consequence of the position she had taken. This isn't the relationship I wanted with you. I had always hoped that as I grew into adulthood, we might develop a connection based on mutual respect. But I cannot continue to sacrifice my well-being for a relationship that causes me consistent pain. I ended with, "If at some point you decide you would like to develop a new relationship based on healthy boundaries and mutual respect, I would be open to that conversation. Until then, I will honor your wish to treat each other as strangers." I read the letter to Jordan, who held me as I cried afterward, not from anger, but from grief for the relationship I had always wanted and would never have. 2 days later, I drove to Chicago alone, the letter carefully folded in my purse. Jordan had offered to come, but this was something I needed to do myself. My parents were surprised to see me on their doorstep unannounced. My mother recovered quickly, her expression guarded as she invited me in. My father hovered anxiously in the background, relief and concern battling on his face. "I've come to respond to what you said at dinner," I stated calmly once we were seated in the living room. "Monica, your mother was upset," my father interjected. "She didn't mean—" "Yes, I did." My mother interrupted her pride, preventing her from backing down. "I meant every word." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "I know, and that's why I wrote this." I handed her the letter. "I'd like you to read it now while I'm here." She took it reluctantly, unfolding the pages with deliberate slowness. I watched her expression change as she read, moving from defiance to disbelief to anger. "This is ridiculous," she said, when she finished tossing the letter onto the coffee table. "You're being melodramatic." "I'm being honest," I replied, "and setting a boundary I should have established years ago. So you're cutting us off completely over one comment made in the heat of the moment." "Not one comment, Mom. A lifetime of criticism and conditional love. And I'm not cutting you off, I'm accepting the terms you set. You said you'd rather treat me as a stranger than as your child. I'm simply acknowledging your preference and responding accordingly." My father picked up the letter and read it quickly, his face paling. "Monica, please. This isn't necessary. We can work this out as a family." "When has she ever stood up for me, Dad?" I asked him directly. "When has she ever defended me from her criticism or acknowledged that her standards might be damaging? When have you—" He had no answer. "This isn't a punishment," I said, echoing the words in my letter. "It's a consequence. And it can change if Mum is willing to respect my boundaries and work toward a healthier relationship." My mother stood up, arms crossed. "You've always been overly sensitive. Now you're being manipulative, trying to force me to apologize for being a good parent who wanted the best for you." "I don't need an apology. I need respect. Respect is earned." "No, Mom. Basic human respect is a starting point, not a reward for good behavior." We went back and forth for nearly an hour, my mother cycling through anger dismissal and attempts to make me feel guilty. My father pleaded for compromise, but I held firm to my position, returning again and again to the simple truth she had made her choice, and I was accepting it. Finally, emotionally exhausted but strangely peaceful, I stood to leave. "This isn't what I wanted," I said truthfully, "but it's what I need to be healthy. The door isn't permanently closed, but the old dynamic cannot continue." As I turned to go, my father followed me to the door. "She didn't mean it. Not really. She's just stubborn." "I know, Dad, but so am I. And I deserve better than what I've been accepting." I drove back to my hotel room feeling both grief and relief wash over me in alternating waves. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from both parents, but I silenced it. I had said everything I needed to say. The weeks that followed were difficult. My mother enlisted relatives to call on her behalf, telling them I was being unreasonable and disrespectful. Flying monkeys, Dr. Winters called them. People sent to pressure you into returning to the dysfunctional dynamic. I held firm, explaining to those I was close to that I was establishing necessary boundaries, not punishing my parents. Some understood, others didn't. I had to accept that not everyone would see the situation from my perspective. My father called regularly, alternating between updates on my mother's distress and pleas for reconciliation. I maintained contact with him, but on my terms, refusing to discuss my mother or be drawn into triangulation. Meanwhile, wedding planning continued. Without my mother's constant criticism, decisions became simpler, more joyful. Jordan's parents stepped in with support, but never pressure, helping where needed, but respecting our vision. Ms. Reynolds, my high school art teacher, who had remained a supportive presence in my life, accepted my invitation to stand in a mother figure role at the ceremony. "I would be honored," she said, her voice thick with emotion when I called her. As the wedding day approached, the absence of my mother was bittersweet. There were moments when I questioned my decision, wondered if I had been too harsh, too unyielding. Dr. Winters helped me work through these doubts. "You haven't closed the door permanently," she reminded me. "You've simply set the terms for a healthier relationship. The choice to meet those terms is hers." My mother chose not to meet them. She did not attend our wedding. But surrounded by people who truly celebrated our love and respected our choices, I found I could embrace the joy of the day without being consumed by her absence. Yaks. The 2 years following my wedding have been a journey of healing, one that continues every day. Initially, I struggled with waves of grief and doubt. Had I made the right decision? Was I being too rigid in maintaining my boundaries? Dr. Winters helped me understand that these feelings were normal part of the mourning process for the mother-daughter relationship I had always wanted but never had. You're not grieving the actual relationship, she explained. You're grieving the loss of hope that it could become what you needed. Therapy became my lifeline during those early months. I learned techniques to manage the guilt that often surfaced, particularly around holidays and family events. I worked through anger that occasionally flared when I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Meanwhile, I focused on building my chosen family. Jordan's parents welcomed me completely, never trying to replace my parents, but offering genuine parental affection. Our friend group became closer, hosting Thanksgiving dinners and creating new traditions that felt authentic and joyful. My relationship with my father evolved into something complicated but workable. He called regularly, careful to respect my boundaries by not pushing for reconciliation or sharing details about my life with my mother. We met for lunch when he came to Boston on business, our conversations focusing on his work, my career, neutral topics that kept us connected without reopening wounds. Through him, I received occasional updates about my mother. She had told extended family that I had cut her off without explanation, painting herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter. She had redecorated my childhood bedroom into a home office, removing all traces of my existence. She had started a new book club, taken up tennis again, carried on with her life, as though the estrangement was merely an inconvenience rather than a profound loss. These updates stung but less sharply as time passed. I was building a life based on authentic connections and mutual respect, something I had never experienced in my relationship with her. My career continued to flourish. I was promoted to senior designer, then creative director for a major client account. My work won industry recognition, validating the path I had chosen, despite my mother's predictions of failure. Each success felt like confirmation that I had been right to trust my own instincts. Jordan and I settled into married life with surprisingly few adjustments. We had always communicated well, respecting each other's independence while building a strong partnership. The contrast between our relationship and what I had observed between my parents was striking, reinforcing my determination to break unhealthy patterns. As our second anniversary approached, we began discussing the possibility of starting a family. The prospect filled me with both excitement and terror. What if I carried forward the same damaging patterns? What if I didn't know how to be the mother I had never had? You're not your mother, Jordan reminded me as we talked late into the night. You've done so much work to understand and heal from your childhood. You'll be a wonderful mother. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I was committed to doing everything possible to create a different experience for our child. I read parenting books that emphasized emotional intelligence and respectful communication. I joined a support group for adults from dysfunctional families who were becoming parents themselves. I even increased my therapy sessions to work through specific fears about parenthood. When the pregnancy test showed positive 6 months later, my emotions were complex joy and anxiety intertwined. As I watched Jordan's face light up with happiness, I made a silent promise to our unborn child: you will always know you are loved exactly as you are. The pregnancy brought a renewed sense of loss about my estrangement from my mother. There were moments when I found myself reaching for the phone, wanting to share the news, wondering if becoming a grandmother might soften her somehow. But Dr. Winters cautioned me against expecting transformation. People generally don't change unless they recognize a need to and commit to doing the work, she said. Giving her access to your child without evidence of real change could expose another generation to the same harmful dynamics. Kasi, I knew she was right, but the sadness persisted. This should have been a time of connection between us, of wisdom passed from one generation to the next. Instead, the distance between us seemed more final than ever. 4 months into my pregnancy, my grandfather, my mother's father, passed away. The funeral would be the first time I would see my mother since establishing my boundary 2 years earlier. I deliberated about attending, ultimately deciding that honoring my grandfather's memory was more important than avoiding potential conflict. Jordan and I flew to Chicago, my baby bump still small but noticeable beneath my black dress. The service was beautiful, a celebration of a kind, gentle man who had always shown me unconditional love. As family gathered afterward at my aunt's house, I steeled myself for the inevitable encounter. My mother approached me in the kitchen as I was getting water, her eyes flickering briefly to my stomach before meeting my gaze. She looked older, more lines around her eyes, her posture slightly less rigid than I remembered. Monica. Her tone was neutral, neither warm nor cold. Mom, I'm sorry about Grandpa. I know how close you were. She nodded stiffly. Thank you for coming. It would have meant a lot to him. An awkward silence stretched between us. Then, in a move that stunned me, she attempted small talk as if the estrangement didn't exist. So you're expecting? When are you due? The casual question, after years of silence, after everything that had happened, left me momentarily speechless. Was this her way of extending an olive branch, or was she simply maintaining appearances in front of family? September? I replied cautiously. Well, congratulations. She said it like she might to a distant acquaintance without emotion or genuine interest. In that moment, I realized she was doing exactly what she had promised, treating me as a stranger. There was no acknowledgement of our history, no indication that she had reflected on her role in our broken relationship, no genuine desire to reconnect. Just empty social niceties. I maintained my composure throughout the interaction, answering her superficial questions with polite brevity. When she excused herself to greet other relatives, I felt a curious sense of clarity wash over me. The encounter confirmed what I had suspected, but being reluctant to accept my mother was incapable of the kind of self-reflection necessary for real change. She would rather maintain the fiction that everything was fine, that we were simply distant rather than estranged, than acknowledge the pain she had caused or make meaningful amends. Strangely, this realization didn't devastate me as it once might have. Instead, it reinforced the wisdom of the boundary I had established. I was protecting myself and now my child from a dynamic that could only cause harm. On the flight back to Boston, Jordan held my hand as I gazed out the window at the clouds below. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am," I answered, surprised to find it was true. I think I've finally accepted that she is who she is, and that I deserve better. In the months since, as my body has changed and our baby has grown, I've come to a profound understanding being treated as a stranger by my mother was ultimately a gift. It freed me from the endless cycle of seeking approval I could never earn. It allowed me to build a life based on authentic connection rather than obligation. It gave me the courage to create boundaries that protect my well-being and the well-being of my family. As I prepare to become a mother myself, I am committed to breaking the cycle. My child will know they are loved unconditionally. They will be allowed to make mistakes, to be imperfect, to be exactly who they are. Their achievements will be celebrated, but their worth will never be tied to them. They will be respected as an individual, not seen as an extension of my ego or ambitions. The journey hasn't been easy, and there are still difficult days, but I no longer wake up with that familiar knot of anxiety in my chest. I no longer hear my mother's critical voice in my head, questioning my every decision. I am learning slowly but surely to be gentle with myself in ways my mother never was. If you're in a similar situation, wondering if it's okay to create distance from toxic family relationships, I want you to know that it is. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Family bonds are important, but not at the cost of your mental health and self-worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to step back from relationships that consistently cause harm. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you navigate that challenging process? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, you deserve relationships that build you up, not tear you down. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage and peace on your own journey to healing.